Hey Dad, how you doing? What's going on?
I'm doing, I'm doing good, Bernie. How are you?
Awesome, great, great. So, as you know, I started this new Instagram page to encourage people to get out and vote, and it's called Vote with Me USA. And I think we're sitting here on election eve for the 2018 midterm elections. So I think it would be really fitting to have this conversation right now. Basically, like given the fact that you grew up in the South during the '60s, I think there's a lot of things that you saw during your lifetime that could be relevant and to provide some a really good insight for people that are really thinking about voting or thinking about sitting on the sidelines, just to kind of show like exactly how important it is to voice your opinion and get involved this year. So let's just first of all like just talk briefly about like where you grew up and some of the things that were happening during the time that you were growing up.
Yeah, well, boy, I mean, as you were talking, my mind was just racing, and I just thought about how in my own lifetime I've seen such a dramatic difference in especially when it comes to voting and such like that. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, on a college campus. The campus was Opa College campus, and it was primarily a school for minorities, primarily blacks and people from international countries. And back in the '60s, when I was coming up, pretty much blacks were really starting to get the right to vote when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't even vote myself until much later in life, all the way into the 1980s, as a matter of fact. And so when I think about this whole subject, it's mind blowing, and it's also amazing that we have such a great opportunity to participate in this wonderful democracy that we have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some great points, and I'm sure, given the time in history, you saw a lot. Obviously, Martin Luther King was alive during that time, so you had an opportunity to see, to see his movement rise, and I think there were a lot of voting issues that were on the line at that time as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things that you knew about, maybe even like some of the things that you knew that your parents were going through at the time?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, we grew up in a very segregated society. Um, just think about it. When I was born 100 miles away from Huntsville, Alabama, and I was born in Nashville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because my parents didn't feel comfortable going to the public hospital where segregation was the rule of the day, and they were concerned about the care that my mother would get. And so we came from a family of 11, and so every time my mother was giving birth, they would travel 100 miles to a hospital in Nashville, Tennessee, which happened to be of our same religious faith, and it was also wonderful doctors there that were very good at what they did, and they were black, and it was amazing to see people that were competent in their day, coming up in such most difficult times. And I always have fun saying that, making it up the road that many times, and 11 of us being in the family, you knew at least one of us wouldn't make it. Well, not me, but my brother Sam. He
Mm-hmm.
was born somewhere between Huntsville and Nashville. Even when we traveled, because my dad was from New Rochelle, New York, and we would go to New York for the summers, and we'd spend a lot of time there. You don't even think about it today, but we would have to travel all the way through the night nonstop because we really didn't have hotels that we could trust. Or maybe there was family or friends somewhere along the way that you would stop and you would spend the night with them. But that was the only thing that was safe back in those days. I mean, it sounds very surreal, but that's what we had to live through.
Yeah, and you bring up some really good points. And obviously, growing up in the South, there was a lot of segregation. Which you talked about. One important thing that I'd like to highlight is, in 1870, the 15th Amendment in the United States, the Constitution, they added that so that it basically took away the ability to deny African Americans the right to vote. And then in 1965, with LBJ, invoking the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which gave a lot of protection for blacks like during that time. And so, those were, I'm sure that those were things that were truly relevant to what was going on, especially in the South. And so.
Well, just think about it. The 14th Amendment, I mean, that was like a major thing that had to be done as a change to the Constitution to give people of color the right to vote. And I think everyone owes a debt of gratitude to all of these people who sacrificed their lives for this, because it wasn't just black people that it opened up for. That
Mhm.
opened up for Indians, for Chinese, for anyone who was a non-European. The 14th Amendment was incredible, but it took all the way from that 1870 era all the way up into the 1960s. Imagine that. When I was a little boy,
Mhm.
it took all the way through that time in order for people to actually, of color, to actually get the right to vote. And just think of it, many people died going up and down the highways trying to enlist people to go out and vote and exercise their right. And many people died. Martin Luther King was amazing in himself. We did have an encounter with him at Oakwood College because he was giving a speech at Alabama A&M University, and the governor, Governor Wallace, heard about it, and since Alabama A&M was a state university, he barred him from actually giving that speech at Alabama A&M. And M.
Wow.
And so Oakwood College actually was contacted by Dr. King and his team because it was right down the street in Huntsville, Alabama, and they asked if Oakwood College would open up for Dr. King. It was a big thing, and the administration opened up the doors. And when I was a little boy, Dr. King came to Huntsville, Alabama, to that college, and because the president had the foresight to open up the doors to him, Martin Luther King actually gave his first run of the "I Have a Dream" speech, and it happened right there.
Wow.
It quite amazing in his story.
Wow. Yeah, that was definitely something to behold. That's pretty amazing that you were able to, experience that even as a young fellow, right? So I like to kind of fast forward. I think that's a good segue into the next topic. When was the first time that you actually took the opportunity to vote?
It wasn't until I was an adult. I had kids, and I remember it was back in, I believe it was 1980. It might be a significant year for you.
I don't know why. I think that was around the year that I was born.
Something like that.
I'm like dating myself to anybody who's watching this. So.
Exactly. And I just felt a need then that it was time. It was important to vote. There were a lot of issues on the ballot, and who was running for office. They were challenging who we were as a people as well.
Hmm.
And that's when it got started. And I haven't missed an election for the nation, the national elections since. And I have to admit, I haven't been as active in the midterms, but I can assure you, from what I'm seeing right now, there is no way that I will not be active in every midterm election from here on out. I can
Right.
tell you that.
Yeah, those are. I know that I feel the same way this is the first time that I'm going to be voting in a midterm election, and I know I voted in the primaries, and I feel compelled uh, just as much to. I mean, this time more than any other time. So you're definitely right about that. So let's talk about the 2016 election. From living in the South, we already talked about growing up during the civil rights era, and then seeing the election of our country's first black president. Um, how did you feel when President Obama got elected?
Wow. That was crazy. And every time I just think about that election, I think about my mother. She was so active and she was such a proponent for politics and such. She was very early on involved with some civil rights changes that were taking place in Huntsville, Alabama. And she actually served on some political boards that were appointed by the President Johnson. And so when I think of President Obama's election,
In
it's very
2008, I want to correct myself because I said 2016, but it was 2008.
yeah, yeah, indeed, indeed. But it's very emotional for me because I wish my mother were alive to have seen him elected because it just seemed to be so impossible
Hmm.
that someone could, of color, a black man to be elected as president. But I'll tell you, I'm mad at him too because I felt like that I should be the first black president. He took that little mantle away from me, and once he did it, I felt like that was good job done, and I didn't need to run after that.
Well, you actually have the next best thing because you actually look like you could be related to him. So,
Yes, I'll tell you, after the election, many people came up to me and told me I looked like President Obama, so I had about 5 minutes of fame back then. I
um,
remember the day that he was elected. I was driving on the road, and I heard the results. And I'll tell you, I just broke down and cried. It was quite amazing.
yeah,
Just the idea that every person, regardless of who they are, color, race, background, doesn't matter. You could actually be the leader of the free world. That was so
it's
amazing,
amazing.
and
Yeah,
it was an amazing time. So, we experienced a great thing.
yeah, for sure. So, having said that, in comparison, after President Obama finished his two terms because he got reelected in 2012, right? Um, how did you feel when Donald Trump got elected and 2 years ago in 2016?
Well, I really consider myself not a person that it votes because of a person's color, and nor would I vote for a person because they're either Democrat or Republican. I'm really looking for people who stand up for right and for the good, and want to move the country progressively forward. Because if you think back on those bad times when we grew up, we always wanted to participate and be a part of society. So any amount of idea that society would go backwards, it was chilling to us because we saw so much. And when I was a kid, I grew up and I went to public school. I experienced busing. I experienced it when there were riots and things in the schools. I experienced hatred for people where I had to walk home every day in fear for what was going to be thrown at me or what I was going to be called. We never want to go back to those things. But what I saw in Donald Trump is I saw the potential of hatred coming back again and then taking seed in America. And he reminded me of George Wallace. And in George Wallace's day, he was a very, very, very segregated, a man that would supported segregation, and he stood for a lot of hate. And I was concerned about that. And in my opinion, I think when you look at what has taken place, I think it is it we basically are seeing a reenactment of history.
Mm-hmm.
But George Wallace was not elected president, but this man was,
Mm-hmm.
and I think every American needs to sit up and take notice.
Yeah, for that's some really good points you're making there. And then even looking back, like given our discussion so far, looking back at history that's occurred during your lifetime, how important? And I think you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can dive into it a little bit more. How important do you think the 2018 midterm election is, given all of those emotions, all of these things that are happening now, everything that's happened to you so far? Like, how what do you think, and what would your message be to someone that's thinking about sitting on the sidelines this year?
Well, I think we saw that take place, in the last election 2 or 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we saw what happened when people said, "Well, I'm just not going to vote." Okay, well, you got what you got because that's what you did. And what strikes me most is when I look on, and I live in Texas. So what strikes me the most is when I look on the board and when they're reporting those numbers, I can look up on that board and I can say, one of those numbers represents my vote. That is unbelievable that I have that opportunity and that privilege. And I can tell you, everyone who sits out, I want to remind anybody, if they think that democracy is a safety net, it has no safety net. This country was not built on allowing everybody to participate in this. The Constitution had to be amended. The 14th Amendment had to be amended. So, what does that mean? When the current president talks about abolishing the 14th Amendment, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that says? We are one amendment away from returning to slavery.
Mm-hmm.
That's what every vote matters now.
Yeah.
There is safety in anything except that all the people vote and all the good people vote, because there are a lot of bad people that will vote, but
Mm-hmm.
we just have to flood them with the good people.
Yeah, I mean, those are some really powerful words, and I think you echo the feelings of a lot of people that are voting in this midterm election. You know, you've seen over the last like coming weeks, a lot of people speak out towards the behavior of this administration and the behavior of Donald Trump, who's the head of this administration. You know, how do you feel about like when you see some of these people that are speaking out, like Oprah? You know, you see her; she's a acclaimed independent. You also see some Republicans, voicing their opinion as well, very strong opinions. Like, what do you feel about that?
Well, I've often said that, I have Republican tendencies, I have Democratic tendencies, but what I really am interested in is I'm interested in a country that's constantly moving forward, becoming more inclusive, not exclusive. That is dangerous. When you exclude and when you you oppress people, that's not the goodness of our nation. That's not the better angels of who we are. But I've been seeing some amazing people coming out, and they're risking their friendships and everything. Captain Sully, the man who landed that plane in the harbor,
In the Hudson.
on the Hudson
Mm-hmm.
River in New York, he just came out and he forcefully said, "You know what? I'm voting straight Democrat, and I've never done that before in my life.
Right.
I'm a Republican." Steve Schmidt, David Jolly. These are people who are sincere about their politics, but they're also interested in the country moving forward in a progressive way. We are in danger. This country is in danger of losing it right here. And I just can't overstress the importance of getting out of your seat and voting.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's the very last day. I already voted. The
Yeah.
very first day that they opened up for early election, I was there. I was
Mm-hmm.
standing in line. I was there. I wanted to get my vote out really, really early. So, all I can do is just really appeal to everybody, because this is really some dangerous territory that we're in right now.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for sharing your perspective. I know a lot of that's personal, but I think a lot of that experience was relative to what some people were feeling, and also I really wanted to hear your take on and for you to share why it's important for people to not sit on the sidelines this year and get involved. Um, and so I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Cool. All right, thanks, Dad. We'll have a good night, and I'm kind of anxious to see what happens tomorrow. It's gonna be a long night.
I'll be staying up a little bit late tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll see how it turns out.
All right, Dad. Have a good night.